Now that we had a plan, it was time to break ground. The reason for scraping the top surface of this garden was so that way in the future, grass and weeds would not be growing through. Typically, you would not see this in permaculture, and instead you would cover the ground with cardboard and keep it wet until the weeds and grass die, and then build up from there. But we had a few different reasons why we wanted to do it this way. One, we had a big pond that previous owners had tried to build but built improperly and never quite made it to become an actual pond and would instead become just a mosquito pit. Two, our space was huge and it would take us months, if not years, to prep the ground otherwise. And three, we wanted to get this garden going. We also had to take down some trees. We had to do so for more light into our garden, and also these black walnuts contain a natural herbicide called juglone. The juglone would inhibit anything from growing underneath these trees, but we would use whatever we could to mulch into the garden and use as pathways so we have a weed-free pathway. We had about 7 trees that we had to take out, and so the crew had to work in steps going from cleaning up some of the ground to taking down some trees, mulching it in place, and going back and forth. Instead of hiring contractors, you can absolutely do this yourself without a crane using a sod cutter and then rolling whatever you take up into a compost pile. You could also use the cardboard method. This would just take more time. And we were actually able to sell a bunch of the black walnut logs to lumber mills because of their high value. Taking down a tree should never be a lighthearted decision and should only be considered if the tree is diseased, invasive, or in this case contained juglone. But the fact that we were able to use those logs and turn it into something really beautiful for this garden really made it feel right. This is going to be our blueberry bed, and because it needs acidic soil, we are going to mulch specifically with pine needles and not the black walnut mulch. And then for all the areas of travel, we're going to reseed with grasses and some nitrogen fixers like clover. And then we're going to move the mulch when we're ready to create our in-ground bed. So this black walnut mulch is only going to be used for the pathways eventually. So to build out the design of the garden, my husband came in and drew lines as to where the garden beds were going to go, and then we had to scoop out the mulch inside those beds. Once the beds were scooped out, we decided which beds were going to get Hugelkultur first. We had a limited number of logs that we could use, so we decided to put soil and compost around the perimeter and then lay our logs and place the soil in the other beds. It was going to be too much to try to do all of these beds in Hugelkultur, and having some beds ready to plant allowed me to plant right away. Hugelkultur is a type of raised bed, but it's in ground in the sense that you're building from the ground up. This method ensures long-term soil fertility as all of these pieces break down over time. You start with the log at the very bottom and then layer up lasagna style with smaller things like branches and then mulch. The mulch was actually a really critical step in this part because it really locked in all of the branches and then the soil goes on top. With Hugelkultur, it takes a long time for everything to break down and lock into place. So all of your root vegetables should be planted along the sides and more shallow vegetables should be planted along the top. We're doing the majority of our beds Hugelkultur style and the rest will be straight compost.